I knew it all along, you son of a bitch. And I'm finna beat your. Don't play with me. I seen that my own eyes. And I'm finna dust ass. And I mean that. And I mean that. You been lying, ho. You a liar. And I'm finna beat you now, bitch. Don't ever hang up when I'm yelling. Don't ever hang up. Don't ever hang up my face.
She ain't finna answer me.
She know.
She was a mother of 4 who worked 2 jobs, bought her dream home, and built a life filled with laughter and plans for the future. Yet the person closest to her once posted, "Happy Valentine's Day to my sweet and sour-ass wife, us against the world. 6 years of toxic love." The same person also sent a message that read, "You'll be dead soon. I'm going for a 1st degree, not 2nd. I stamped that." On the evening of November 16, 2022, those words came to life. A gun was raised inside the home, shots were fired, and a toddler stood only feet away as everything changed forever. Later, investigators would find cameras that showed the weapon in the killer's hands, and they would discover that the road to that night was not sudden, not unexpected, but the result of years of escalating threats and ignored warnings. But before we begin, if you find this video interesting, please give it a like at the end and tell me what you think about the case. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you. Cornisha Butler had been born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, in the Orange Mound community, and from an early age she carried herself with a kind of independence that stood out. Friends described her as magnetic, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and draw people in with her laughter, and family remembered her as the one who held everyone together, always knowing how to ease tension or turn a heavy moment into something lighter. But life had not been easy, and nothing was simply handed to her. She became a mother while she was still young, and while many people might have struggled under that responsibility, Cornesia used it as fuel. She poured everything into her children. She had 3 daughters and 1 son, and they became the driving force behind every decision she made. So when opportunities in Memphis seemed limited, she made a choice that would shape her future. She moved to Atlanta because she wanted more for her family. It was a risk, but it was also a step toward the vision she had carried for years. A home where her children could feel safe. A life where stability wasn't a dream but something real and lasting. In Atlanta, she built her life piece by piece. By day, she worked as a registered tax preparer. She understood systems, she knew numbers, and she used those skills to bring in steady income and provide financial stability. She didn't stop there. By night, she followed her creative passions, working as a licensed esthetician and building a clientele that trusted her to bring out their best selves. She worked long hours, but she kept going, because every late night and every early morning was for her children. And the work paid off. With her determination and hustle, she saved. And eventually she bought her dream home, a 5-bedroom house in South Fulton. For her, it was more than square footage. It was proof of her resilience, a symbol of everything she had fought to achieve. She decorated it with care, and she filled it with family gatherings, birthdays, and holiday celebrations. She shared photos on social media, proud to show not just the house but the joy that filled it. Cornesia also had a style that was instantly recognizable. She loved pink, and she leaned into it as part of her identity. Her cars, a Mercedes-Benz and a Jeep, were painted pink, standing out on the streets of Atlanta the same way she stood out in life. They weren't just vehicles. They were expressions of personality, reminders of how far she had come from her beginnings in Memphis. But while the surface looked bright, the home, the cars, the celebrations, the laughter captured in posts, there was another reality growing alongside it. Because behind every celebration post, a storm gathered, and the first crack appeared on a dark road in September 2021. Cornesia first met Shakia Perkins in 2016, and in the beginning, it felt like the kind of connection that could last. The relationship moved quickly, and within months they were living together, blending their lives in a way that looked picture-perfect from the outside. To friends and family scrolling through social media, it seemed like Cornesia had found someone who was attentive and devoted, someone who showed up for her in a way that looked solid. But what those same friends later realized was that the image didn't match reality. Because slowly, control began to creep in. What started as small questions about where she was or who she was with grew into constant accusations and monitoring. Shakia's behavior became possessive, and the arguments that followed turned their home into a place of tension rather than peace. Cornesia tried to keep it together for her children, but even in the early years of the relationship, cracks were already forming. Still, from the outside, the couple managed to project an image of unity. On Valentine's Day 2022, after nearly 6 years of being together on and off, Shakia posted a message that read, "Happy Valentine's Day to my sweet and sour-ass wife. Us against the world. 6 years of toxic love. I wouldn't do it with nobody else but you." Cornesia responded to that post with a caption of her own, calling them the Toxics and writing, "I love you, ready for our day." To anyone looking in, it read like devotion. But to those who had watched the cycles of breakups, reconciliations, and escalating fights, it sounded like something else entirely. Friends sometimes joked about the relationship, calling it dangerous or toxic, but beneath the jokes was a real fear that one day the violence would go too far. Cornesia herself confided to people close to her that she worried about where things were heading, but leaving for good was harder than it seemed. She tried more than once to put distance between herself and Shakia, yet each time she was pulled back in, whether by promises, pressure, or the hope that things might finally change. By the fall of 2021, the relationship between Cornisha Butler and Shakia Perkins had moved far beyond arguments and jealousy. It had turned into a pattern of violence that left a trail of evidence investigators would later use to piece together how things had escalated. On September 13, 2021, Cornesia sent a message to her friend Juanisha. She wrote that Shakia had just tried to run her off the road. To prove it, she attached a photo showing the side of her car scraped and damaged. At first, her friend thought she must have mistyped, so he asked whether she meant that Shakia had tried to hurt herself. Cornesia clarified that wasn't the case. Shakia had deliberately struck her car more than once. It was the first documented sign that the danger was no longer limited to words or arguments inside the home. And then, less than 2 weeks later, the violence escalated again. On September 25th, around 5 in the morning, Cornesia's pink Mercedes-Benz and pink Jeep were set on fire in her driveway. Neighbors, Ring cameras captured a Dodge Challenger, the car Shakia was known for driving, pulling into the neighborhood right before the flames erupted. A cousin who had been coming over that morning saw the Challenger leaving just as the blaze took hold. Firefighters contained the flames before they consumed the house, but both cars were destroyed. The vehicles that had become symbols of Cornesia's hard work and identity were reduced to ash in minutes. Police investigated, and the suspicion pointed directly back to Shakia. The evidence was strong enough that on October 4, 2021, she was arrested and charged with grand larceny, aggravated assault, criminal damage to property, and making terroristic threats. For a brief moment, it looked as if Cornesia might finally have the protection she needed. But then came October 12th. Just 8 days later, Shakia was released on bond, and almost immediately the cycle picked up where it had left off. That month, Cornesia began receiving text messages that were chilling in their clarity. Shakia wrote, "My mind made up. You'll be dead soon. I'm going for a first degree, not second. I stamped that." These weren't vague warnings or angry outbursts. They were promises, sent in plain words, and they described the exact outcome that would eventually unfold. Over time, there were 13 separate calls for help. Restraining orders were filed. Reports were taken. Arrests were made. But the cycle never broke because each time the court allowed Shakia to return. And with each return, the violence only grew. And yet, despite everything, the car ramming, the arson, the arrest, the threats that spelled out her intent, by Valentine's Day 2022, they were back together. Why?
She tried to run Cornisha off the road in her car, and this all happened within months of this incident. Also, there was an incident where she set Cornisha's car, she had a Jeep, set her car on fire in the driveway.
Over the course of their relationship, she had called the police 13 times, and each call documented another layer of escalation. Reports showed that Shakia had been charged in 4 separate domestic violence cases in the year before the murder. Each case carried its own weight: car ramming, arson, property damage, threats. And yet, every time an arrest was made, a bond was granted, and every time she was released, the cycle resumed. Police leaders later admitted that their officers had done what they could. South Fulton Police Chief Keith Meadows publicly explained that his department had brought charges in every instance they could, and his officers had responded when Cornesia asked for help. But once the cases went to court, the decisions no longer rested with the police. Judges allowed bond to be set, and despite prosecutors' warning of the danger, the releases kept coming. The district attorney had opposed those bonds, warning that Shakia was violent and unstable, but even those objections weren't enough to keep her in custody. In the days leading up to the tragedy, life on the surface still looked normal, at least through the lens of social media. Cornesia posted a picture of herself with her young son as they prepared to travel. The caption suggested excitement, and friends later confirmed that she was headed to Philadelphia with Shakia, who had scheduled a dental procedure there. To the outside world, it might have looked like a couple making an ordinary trip, but those who knew the history understood how fragile that appearance was. Because behind the posts, the contradictions only deepened. While Shakia often acted as though she wanted control over every aspect of Cornesia's life, questioning her movements, demanding loyalty, and inserting herself into her decisions, she was also known to openly message and flirt with other women. Screenshots later revealed how she reached out online to strangers, trying to start new connections. For Cornesia, the double standard was impossible to ignore. She was being monitored and controlled, while her partner lived by a different set of rules. So while the trip to Philadelphia looked like a gesture of togetherness, it was actually taking place under the weight of suspicion, resentment, and control. And when they returned to Atlanta, the question of whether the relationship could continue came to a head inside Cornesia's own home. By the evening of November 16, 2022, the argument turned into a murder. On the evening of November 16, 2022, the house that had once been filled with plans for the holidays became the center of a confrontation that could no longer be avoided. Inside her Atlanta home, Cornisha Butler faced Shakia Perkins in what began as a heated argument. Voices were raised, emotions spilled over, and the tension that had been building for months finally broke. Cornesia told the truth she had been holding on to: she was done. The relationship had run its course, and she wanted to move forward without the cycle of control and fear that had defined so much of the past 6 years. Shakia's reaction shifted the moment those words landed. At first she appeared to turn away, as if she were leaving, but then she walked out of the room and into the driveway. Neighbors later recalled hearing the front door open and close, but instead of driving away, She went to her car and retrieved a 9mm handgun, then came back inside the house. The argument had ended, but the danger was only beginning. Cornesia's youngest child, a young boy, was in the home at the time. He was only a few feet away, close enough to hear and close enough to see. What happened next took only seconds but changed everything. Shakia raised the gun and fired multiple times at close range. The sounds echoed through the house, and the child's cries quickly followed. At just after 6 o'clock, the first 911 call came in. Dispatchers relayed urgent reports of gunfire inside a home. When officers arrived, they found the front door partially open and a neighbor outside, pointing them toward the entryway. Inside, in the living room, they discovered Cornesia on the floor. Paramedics attempted to revive her, but her injuries were catastrophic. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her toddler son was pulled from the house unharmed physically, but forever marked by what he had just witnessed. This would eventually become even more sore when it was later discovered that the father of the baby was no longer alive. The officers knew immediately that this was not the kind of crime scene that left questions about motive. Everything about it suggested intent. Detectives saw premeditation everywhere they looked. Forensic teams moved quickly through the living room. They recovered 9mm shell casings from the floor, and early analysis confirmed that the shots had been fired at close range. It was the first piece of evidence, and it would later be matched directly to a 9mm handgun found in Shakia's vehicle. Detectives then turned to the neighborhood. As they canvassed the area, residents described what they had seen and heard. Some spoke of voices raised inside the house. Others mentioned hearing the sharp cracks of gunfire. One neighbor recalled watching a car circle slowly through the streets before parking for long stretches, as if waiting. Those details reinforced what the evidence already suggested. This was targeted, personal, and deliberate. The digital trail was just as telling. Investigators tracked Shakia's phone and found that it had pinged towers near Cornesia's home at the exact time of the shooting. Minutes later, the same device registered across town at an apartment complex tied to her sister. The timeline was clear, and it placed her in the scene from start to finish. By 10:30 that night, the South Fulton Tactical Unit had surrounded the apartment building. The atmosphere was tense. This was an armed suspect who had just demonstrated she was willing to follow through on her threats. But when the door opened, there was no shootout, no resistance. Shakia surrendered quietly, hands raised, shifting from sobbing hysteria to chilling calm in a matter of moments. The search that followed closed the loop. Inside her vehicle, investigators found the 9mm handgun, the same caliber used in the shooting. They also discovered a notebook filled with details of Cornesia's daily schedule and routines, a record that suggested planning, not impulse. And on her phone, they uncovered a draft message that had never been sent. It read, "It's done now. You can't leave me again." By the time the night ended, detectives had built a chain of evidence that told a clear story. It was not just a crime of passion or a heated moment gone too far. When the case finally reached the courtroom, the prosecution laid out a story that stretched back more than a year. Piece by piece, they mapped the timeline of escalation. They showed the jury the police reports from September 2021, when Cornesia's car had been rammed on the road. They described the forced entry into her home during a jealous rage. They presented the fire investigation that documented the arson of her pink Mercedes and Jeep. They reminded the court of the restraining orders, the repeated calls for help, and the threats that had been written down in plain words. The text messages hit hardest. In one, Shakia had written, "You'll be dead soon, I'm going for a first degree, not second. I stamped that." The prosecution didn't need to dramatize it. The words spoke for themselves, and the fact that Cornesia had shown them to friends and family months earlier proved she had known the danger was real. Then came the forensic evidence. Ballistics matched the 9mm handgun in Shakia's car to the shell casings found at the scene. Cell site data placed her phone near Cornesia's house at the exact time of the murder, and investigators displayed the notebook where Shakia had written down Cornesia's daily routines, highlighting just how deliberate the planning had been. Witnesses filled in the human side of the story. Neighbors testified that they had heard fights in the past and had seen the destruction left behind after arguments. Friends recalled late-night phone calls when Cornesia whispered that she didn't feel safe, that she feared one day Shakia would carry out her threats. Family members told the court how they had watched her pull away socially, and how the control over her life had grown more suffocating with time. The defense tried to offer a different picture. They argued that Shakia had been suffering from untreated mental health struggles, and that the shooting was a sudden outburst rather than a calculated act. They suggested instability, not intent, but the evidence stacked against her, the threats, the surveillance, the notebook, the gun, and the digital trail, painted a very different story. The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with their verdict. They found Shakia Perkins guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of possessing a firearm during the commission of a felony, and guilty of cruelty to children for forcing a toddler to witness the crime. The judge delivered the sentence without hesitation: life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the final moments of the trial, victim impact statements brought the weight of the loss into the room. Advocates read words on behalf of Cornesia's children, who spoke of birthdays without their mother, holidays that felt empty, and the silence that had replaced her laughter. Even hardened court staff admitted that the testimonies were some of the most painful they had ever heard. Justice had been delivered in the legal sense, but as her family made clear, justice in law isn't the same as bringing a mother back. The days after the verdict, Cornesia's family tried to balance relief with grief. Her sister Tarek spoke with quiet strength outside the courthouse. She acknowledged that legal justice had been served, but reminded everyone listening that true justice would have been bringing Cornesia back home to her children. That was the one thing no verdict could deliver. The community gathered again and again to honor her life. Vigils were held throughout South Fulton and across Atlanta. Friends and family released balloons into the sky, lit candles, and filled social media with tributes. They shared photos of her smile, videos of her laughter, and stories of her determination. People who had known her as a neighbor, a friend, or a client in her work all spoke of the gap her absence had left. So what do you think about this case? Should someone who openly admitted that his urges never left him ever be given another chance at freedom? Or are some offenders simply too dangerous to reintegrate into society? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. We really do read every single one. And if you found this story as unsettling as we did, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more true crime cases told in full detail. Until next time, stay safe.